We know that right now in the United States, people are protesting against the policy in Gaza and what's going on in Rafah. And when it comes to this conflict in Gaza, what's the end game for the Biden administration? Because it doesn't seem that they're gaining anything from this conflict as much as they're losing in this conflict. Because in 2024, this conflict in Gaza would be so much problematic for their campaign for 2024, but it doesn't seem that they even care about this. And right now we have huge protests in the universities, at the University of Columbia, at other universities. It's just getting the momentum in the United States. And we have the same thing. The public opinion in Europe is totally against the conflict, against this policy in Gaza. But at the same time, we see the leaders in Europe are not that much in line with the public opinion.
We have roughly the same situation in the West, in Europe as in the US, that the leadership strives to have this strong support towards the Israeli government, and the population, on the other hand, understands that it makes absolutely no sense to continue supporting, because the problem is that we tend to portray that as a support to Israel or support to Palestinians. In fact, I think most people, what they don't like is not Israel or not. They don't like the strategy Israel is using. And the inability of the leadership in Europe to understand that people are against the strategy, not against the country. And since they don't understand that, we see more and more people who become against Israel. And that's the danger of that. I think beyond the fact that the countries, and in particular in the US, because you have the presidential election and we see that Biden lose support, and he will probably, my view is that he may probably lose the election because of that. But the combination of Ukraine, which is a failure, with Gaza, which is a failure too, may eventually cost him the next mandate. But anyway, the thing is that beyond this, we are moving toward a situation where people start hating Jews because they see that the situation, there's a fundamental injustice in the way this war is waged and the way it's managed by the West as well. I mean, we see that we provide weapons and we see the result of these weapons. So people say, why are we supporting that? I mean, they are not against the fact that we support Israel as a state, but they are reluctant providing weapons for that type of result. In addition to that, we have all the massacres and mass graves and things like this that we have discovered that provide a totally different picture of Israel as the one we had before. And people start, and it's interesting to see, if I look at the comments I see here and there in Europe, I see that more and more people tend to switch from, they were against the Israeli government, but now they start to be against the Jews. And we see that this translated to more anti-Semitism everywhere. So we are totally on the wrong path here too. I mean, this is exactly the same thing as with Ukraine or China and all that. We stick to a narrative, and we don't make the slightest move to change this narrative or to adjust this narrative to the realities. And we may well be trapped. I mean, there are these rumors, I don't know if it will materialize or not, this indictment of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense and probably some others by the ICC this week or next week, I don't know. But I have no idea if this will materialize. But in any case, we see that in the case it happens, how will be the reaction? Because that means that then you support a government, you provide weapon to a government which is indicted by the ICC. So we are in total disconnect with what we have done with Vladimir Putin for a situation that was totally different and much more benign in Russia. So we see that this just highlights the inconsistency, the incoherence of the political approach in the West. And this comes even stronger with countries like Germany, because now you have Nicaragua, if I'm not wrong, who also made a claim to the International Court of Justice against Germany because Germany supports the Israeli government with weapons. So they take part into a genocide. So now you have all these jokes about Germany, which doesn't want to be taken the first place as a genocidal state. They had the first place and they don't want to lose it. So, of course, these are jokes, but it shows also that the credibility of countries like Germany, which used to be considered in Europe as a more moderate country, which was definitely an industrial economic power, but we thought that Germany was much more moderate in its way of doing things, that it would not intervene in foreign conflicts, and that in fact it took the lessons from World War II and tried to avoid being involved in situation that might may become extremely tricky. But we have exactly the opposite today. We see that Germany is, and I understand there is some kind of rationale because they have been considered as anti-Semitic in the 30s up to the end of World War II. And now they want to show that they're not anti-Semitic, so they support a plausible genocide, because that's the official terminology, a plausible genocide against the Palestinians. But the problem is that the question is not whether anti-Semitic or so. The question is, do we apply the international right, yes or no? The lesson of World War II is not about anti-Semitism or so. The biggest lesson of World War II is, do we respect the international law, yes or no? That's the lesson. And the biggest, regardless of who does or does not respect the international law, the lesson is respect the international law. And to do that, since 1944 or 45, the world has given itself the instrument to safeguard this international law, as I said before, with the United Nations Security Council, the International Court of Justice, and all that. This is the lesson of World War II. This is the lesson: respect the international law. And that's exactly what the West is not doing right now. For in the pursuit of its own interests, the West has just abandoned the international law. By the way, by abandoning the so-called international law-based order for a rule-based order, which nobody has really defined, which in fact just the West tries to define as it suits it. So this is just absurd. We are totally getting away from this order that was established in 1945, and that's in my view, this is totally dramatic, and that will cost the credibility of the Israeli state, I think, and that will cost it for years, because now everybody will ask itself, should we cooperate? I mean, a lot of countries cooperate militarily or at industrial level, of course, with Israel. I mean, you have, we integrate Israeli technology in some tanks and we sell technology to the Israelis and so on and so forth. But from now on, when we exchange technology for military matters, are we cooperating with a genocidal state? Yes or no? And if yes, are we allowed to do so? Or should we keep some distance with Israel? So Israel may well become more isolated than ever after this conflict. So supporting Israel in that condition is totally misguided. We should have helped Israel to comply with the international law and to help them to solve the problem as nicely as possible instead of going into mass murders and things like this. But we haven't done that. We have, on the contrary, we have supported Israel in doing, in violating, in fact, the international law. So this is something extremely poor for the Israeli, and that will be equally poor for us, because again, you know, Joe Biden, to take just that example, it has failed in Afghanistan. And why did he fail in Afghanistan? Because he didn't respect the agreement that had been signed between the Trump administration and the Taliban. Biden didn't want to abide by this agreement, and that's the reason why the whole thing failed miserably, as we have seen. And the Americans had to leave Afghanistan with the tail between their legs. And that was definitely not, if you compare, for instance, with the Russians or the Soviets at the time, because it was still the Soviet Union, as they left Afghanistan, they left Afghanistan with flags and all that, and the military was happy, the Afghan were happy, everybody was happy, and that you have even a medal for leaving Afghanistan that has been issued by the Soviet government at the time. So it was not considered as a failure. It was considered as mission accomplished. And in fact, if you look at the result, when the Americans left Afghanistan, the government that was put in place by the Americans lasted just for 2 days, while the government that was put in place by the Russians or the Soviets lasted for 2 years. So that shows exactly the nature of the problem. Anyway, that was an American failure. And now you have Ukraine appears as a magnificent failure, and Gaza appears at another magnificent failure, where the West has absolutely no ability to change things and to influence things. We see that the Americans were unable to influence the exchange between Iran and Israel. They were not able to solve the problem with the Ansar Allah in the Yemen, the Houthis, the so-called Houthis, were not able to do that. They were not able to I mean, we are talking about a possible attack, Israeli attack on Rafah. I don't know what will eventually come. I have no idea, but I can assess that based on previous experience, it may well be possible that the Israeli will attack Rafah, meaning that we see that the U.S. influence on Israel is zero. So it's a dramatic failure on all sides. And in addition to that, the worst in all that is that we have not managed to alleviate the suffering of the people. On the contrary, we have just created all these problems. And the situation in the Middle East has been totally wrecked by the Americans since about 20 years now. The French have wrecked the situation in Northern Africa with destabilizing, I mean, even toppling Gaddafi 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. And today they are expelled from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and probably from Chad now. So we see that it's a total failure on every aspect. Everything you look at is a failure. We have failed economically because all the countries are entering huge economical turbulence. We see that we declared China as an enemy, but at the same time, we see that China is probably the only power which is able to help us. So it's a total, on all sides, it's a total failure. Since 20 years, we have failure upon failures. So yes, Biden may well be sanctioned by during the vote, President. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure that Donald Trump, assuming he would be the next president, I'm not sure it will do much better, in fact. The only advantage of Trump, if I can say, is that it may focus more on the US domestic situation rather than focusing on making war abroad. That's probably the only advantage of having Trump. So if Trump creates a mess, he will create it within the United States, but he will not create the mess outside. While with Biden, we'll see that he amplified the mess outside. So that's the only, and there may be different opinion, but if we look at the past during the Trump administration has not, of course, they didn't start any war. This is true. And they even tried to reduce the number of wars. But at the same time, they didn't reduce the tensions with others. I mean, no other president than Trump has issued so much measures, for instance, against Russia. And the same against China. So I'm not sure that these tensions will be reduced with another president. The problem is that the foreign policy, as we see it, is, of course, extremely mismanaged by this tandem, Biden and Blinken. I mean, I think the two are not up to the task intellectually, but it's my assessment. But of course, they messed up the whole thing. But fundamentally, the behavior towards Russia or towards China is bipartisan in the US, meaning that regardless if you have a Republican or Democrat president, it will be exactly the same thing. It might not be, it may not evolve into an open conflict with a Republican. That's possible. But at the same time, it will not solve the problem, because now we have discussed that when talking about China, but we have so many problems that are in fact domestic problems in all the Western countries. There are problems we haven't solved. And we have to solve this problem within our countries before trying to address problem outside. And nobody is ready to do that because it's almost impossible task. I mean, think about the deficit of the US. How will you reduce that? It's almost impossible. So whoever will be the next president of the United States, if he wants to solve the problem of the United States, he will first have to to clean up a little bit the economy and the US households, if you want. And that will be a hard task, I think, regardless of the party he comes from. So we are in a situation where we have fundamental issues within our own establishments. And that applies to all the country with different degrees, but it applies to all countries. And I don't see anybody in the present leadership or the future leadership that we may anticipate, for instance, in France or so. I don't see anybody that has the intellectual capability, let's say, the the capacity, the charisma, and the the ability to be a leader in the country that would take the country to address these issues. I don't see that. So I'm rather pessimistic in the midterm regarding all the Western countries. But that's the way it is, unfortunately.
Before this conflict started, we know that Israel was on a path of normalizing relationship between Israel and Turkey, between Israel and Saudi Arabia. They wanted to open up to have more relationship. And after October 7th, we see that all the decisions that have been made by Netanyahu and his administration just went the opposite way, just worsening the situation. When you look at this situation that the Netanyahu administration is in right now, how do you see this strategy on their part? Why they decided to do that? Why they decided to go along and devastating, destroying everything in Gaza? We know that the main goal that they were mentioning all along this 6 month of conflict in Gaza, they said that we're gonna destroy Hamas. But by the information that they have provided for us, they said something like 11% of Hamas has been removed. And right now, when you see the current phase of the conflict, you see a total collapse of their strategy. This strategy didn't work for them.
Well, first of all, we have to realize that we have an extreme right-wing government now in Israel. This government is probably not 100% popular, but is supported by a lot of people nevertheless. There are people who are contesting this government, but in by and large, this government is supported. But it may be, and Netanyahu, in addition to that, we have to understand that Netanyahu, if he loses his immunity, his political immunity, he will go to jail or to court because he has been indicted for corruption and all that. So meaning that for this government, there is more incentive to move ahead rather than to go back. And when I say to move ahead, that means to increase the pressure and fighting and all that. You know, this idea of having Israel free of Palestinians, I mean, in the borders that in fact have been not officially, but have been accepted by the government, which is in fact the whole Palestine. This is if you look at the publication of the maps in Israel, they take the whole of Israel, including West Bank and all that. This is all Israel according to Israel, although the borders have never been officially, legally defined. But anyway, so meaning that the idea of having a Palestine free of Palestinians, this is extremely popular, meaning that the idea of moving ahead with this policy of ethnic cleansing, there is no incentive to abandon that strategy. That's the first thing. What may happen, I mean, you may have seen that I think it's a minister, Ben-Gvir, who got a car accident, and some say that this car accident may not be totally accidental because there are still some divergence between the political establishment and the military establishment, and even the military side has committed a lot of crimes and all that. The tensions between the military and the political seems to be quite important. So maybe this may develop in some kind of probably not exactly a coup, but probably some accident for some from leaders, I don't know, and that may change the equation within the country. So that's one aspect. Now, the mood in Israel now is that, of course, you have a group of people who want to stop, but they don't want to stop the war because they want to stop the war. They want to stop the war because it's the only way to recover the so-called hostages. And that's we have to understand also the mechanics behind this willingness of stopping the war. It's not for the sake of saving Palestinians. It's for the sake of saving Israelis. But regardless, we may have here a movement that asks for some kind of this situation in Palestine will not have a military solution. It will not. The Palestinians will continue to fight. As long as there are Palestinians, there will be a willingness to fight to recover their country. And that's a legitimate fight, by the way, as I explained already. So this is the situation. So now the problem is whether this Palestinian may have the support from outsider or Arab countries. We didn't see an appetite for the neighbors of Israel to engage into this conflict. Most probably because of and that's probably the only way the US can influence things there, is that these countries don't want to be adverse to the US. I mean, Egypt and Jordan, for instance, they have very long and traditional ties with US. So don't expect them to cut these ties with the US. As to other countries such as Turkey and Saudi Arabia, these countries, both countries, by the way, they want to play a more prominent role in the region. I mean, this is obvious with Turkey, which has been trying to mediate in the Ukrainian conflict, but also in the conflict with between Palestinians and Israelis. And the same with Saudi Arabia, by the way, which we see that Saudi Arabia has managed to reintegrate Iran into the Islamic the League of Islamic countries, League of the Arab countries, sorry. And so these two countries, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, want to play a better, more like a diplomatic role in the region. But we see that those two countries have been strongly in favor of Palestinians, even if they will not engage, let's say, physically in the conflict. And we see, for instance, a few weeks ago, Saudi Arabia has come back with these normalization agreements, the so-called Abraham Agreement, that was stopped after the 7th of October. And now Saudi Arabia has come back with the proposal of renegotiating this agreement. But now, interestingly enough, they have included the Palestinian question into the agreement. And I haven't seen the same move from Turkey, but I assume that if Turkey wants to resume to have normal relationship with Israel and even have some kind of Abraham Accord and so on, they will probably include the Palestinian question, because one of the let's say the problem of these Abraham Agreement is that it was precisely not integrating the Palestinian question. So now these countries have learned the lessons, and probably they may want to link their relationship with Israel together with a political solution to the Palestinian conflict. And that might be a good evolution, if you want, because this could combine integration with Israel within its neighbors, and at the same time addressing the Palestinian question in a political way and not in a military way. The problem may arise depending on how now the Israeli behave in Gaza, because if there is this so-called plausible genocide that is confirmed in Gaza, then it will be hard to sign an agreement with the country that performs a genocide. So that will put an additional pressure on Israel. And that's why I think in Israel, the leadership, but that's not new. That's the way they have handled the issue, all these Palestinian questions since almost 80 years now. The problem is that the Israeli leadership see the problem at tactical level. They don't have a strategic thinking. I mean, for them, strategic thinking is just nuclear bomb. That's where the strategic thinking stops. And probably having the help of the US, period. So they will ask Big Brother to come for help, but they haven't addressed this question of the relationship between the Arab state and with the Palestinian. They never tried to link that. They never tried to solve or to provide any incentive or, let's say, indication that they would like to solve the problem politically. In fact, all the initiatives that were, and we have to recognize this, that was done by the US, shown in the 70s with President Carter and the Camp David agreement, and then the Oslo process and all that. This was all largely managed by the US. But the problem is that we don't see the US has not the same skills as it used to have. And we see that, for instance, Blinken is totally lost with this conflict. Probably also because he might be also have a partisan view on that. I mean, he's a Jew, and basically, you know, most of the Jews that you have in Israel come from the region of Ukraine today. This is the probably 80% of the Jewish population in Israel come from this area between Ukraine and Poland. That is a traditional Jewish area. Ben Gurion came from there. Golda Meir come from there. Blinken comes from there. Victoria Nuland comes from there. You know, all these names, they all come from the same region, meaning that we cannot expect from them an impartial understanding of the problem. They will take side with the Israelis. And today we see that this is not the solution. However, we see the problem, and whoever we prefer or not, the thing is that today you cannot just address the problem from an Israeli point of view. You cannot. You have to address the Arab and Palestinian concerns. This is definitely so. So we have here in the State Department today in the US, we may not have the right people to address this question from an impartial point of view. And and that probably explains also the failure of the US to take influence in this conflict, by the way. So we have a situation where unless there's a drastic change in the Israeli leadership, I mean, either a change of the persons or a change within the persons, which is very unlikely, we will continue on the same path. And I think this path is, in my view, in the mid and long run, detrimental to Israel. And I even said that it might, at one point, if we continue to see those mass graves and all that, it may well trigger something bigger. At one point, these Arab countries who are traditionally related to the West and willing to take a very neutral stance on this conflict, they may well change side and solve the problem once for all. That might be the end of the Israel we know today. I don't know. I don't hope we go into that situation, but I think with this kind of extremist stance that we are witnessing on that side, because we have to underline that the position of the Palestinian is totally legitimate, and this has been underlined many times. I mean, dozens of times in dozens of resolutions of the Security Council. Israel has been condemned so many times, and I still don't understand how come the Western countries have not tried to discipline, if you want, Israel. And so the Palestinians have a legitimate cause there. So that's we have to. They are probably not the strongest force on the ground, but they have the most legitimate cause. So we may, if there is no political situation, if we come to a military situation, and we have seen that with Iran, we almost went into some kind of confrontation. I mean, military confrontation. We see that the Hezbollah is ready to confront Israel in a way, and we see that they are effective. We see that the technology that Hezbollah has developed is very effective against the Israelis. So the Israelis do not have the technical edge that they used to have, and that's the problem what we are witnessing, and Israel should be aware of that, because if Arab countries would join against Israel, the US would be, of course, tempted and probably would be forced to intervene, but I'm not sure this will come good. So I think the political solution is definitely the only one, and we should strive that. I don't understand why the Western countries do not do that, but anyway, this is this is the situation, unfortunately.